Not a rebuild kit, not a dealer flush, not a subscription service or a diagnostic fee or a 3-hour appointment at a dealership that smells like carpet cleaner and commission breath. $4, one bottle, and the documented ability to push your transmission past 250,000 miles while the industry built a billion-dollar empire betting you'd never find out. Your transmission is dying right now. Not dramatically, quietly, microscopically. ClutchPack Fiber by ClutchPack Fiber. Every time you accelerate from a light, every time the fluid temperature climbs past 185 degrees on the highway, and the stock ATF starts losing its grip on the metal it's supposed to protect. Every hard merge onto the freeway, every tow load, every summer afternoon when the transmission tunnel radiates heat into fluid that was already running at the edge of its protective range. Every stop and go commute where the torque converter cycles 40 times before you reach the on-ramp. Every cold start in January when the fluid is thick and the clutch packs engage before the modifier film has fully distributed across the friction surface. The damage is cumulative. The industry knows exactly how cumulative. There is a solution. It costs $4. It fits in your pocket. It weighs less than a can of soda. And it was removed from your owner's manual deliberately by people who understood exactly what it was worth to them if you never discovered it. The people who profit when you don't know. The people who built an entire service infrastructure around a problem that a $4 bottle prevents. But to understand why your manual doesn't mention it, you have to go back to Japan, 1964, inside a Toyota assembly facility in Toyota City that no one outside the factory floor was supposed to talk about. The engineers working quality assurance on the A40 automatic transmission series weren't trying to make history. They were trying to solve a specific grinding problem. Clutch pack wear during break-in sequences was degrading transmission response faster than the design tolerances allowed. The fluid was right, the hardware was right, but at operating temperature, somewhere between the 8,000 mile mark and the 15,000 mile mark, the friction characteristics of the stock automatic transmission fluid began to shift. The clutch packs ran hotter, response softened, shift quality degraded. The engineers could feel it and test vehicles on the evaluation circuit, a slight hesitation at the 2 to 3 upshift, a softness and kickdown that shouldn't have been there at 12,000 miles. One of the Ace and Warner drivetrain engineers, working under pressure from Toyota's quality mandate, introduced a small volume friction modifier compound into the factory ATF protocol during break-in. The results documented in internal Ace and quality assessment records from the period were significant. Clutch pack surface wear during the critical first 10,000 miles dropped measurably. Transmission response remained consistent tens of thousands of miles beyond factory expectations. The fix was cheap, it was simple, it was repeatable, and when Toyota's American import partners received the vehicle specifications and service documentation, the friction modifier protocol was not included. The import deal moved forward. The paperwork stayed in Toyota City. That is twist number 1, a solution discovered in a Japanese factory, QA Bay, proven on the line that built the cars flooding American roads, silently removed before the manuals were ever printed for US dealers. Not by accident, by the structural logic of a parts and service economy that needed something to break, that needed your transmission to fail on schedule at a mileage range the industry could predict in a way that generated maximum billable hours at the exact moment your warranty had expired and your leverage had disappeared. Through the 1970s and into the 1980s, while American dealerships sold transmission flushes for prices that bore no relationship to fluid cost, a different story was playing out in commercial fleet garages across the country. Municipal taxi operations in Chicago and New York, running fleets of 400 or more vehicles on tight maintenance budgets with zero tolerance for transmission downtime, had discovered the same friction modifier principle through a different path. Fleet managers, whose names are buried in maintenance logs that the relevant municipal agencies have never publicized, were authorizing the addition of aftermarket friction modifier concentrate to ATF at every fluid service interval. These were practical men running practical operations. No theory, no laboratory, no corporate mandate, just mileage logs and repair budgets that rewarded whatever kept the cars moving and punished whatever let them sit. The additive cost approximately $4 per vehicle. The documented result was a service interval extension of roughly 30,000 additional miles before transmission performance degraded enough to require intervention. 400 cabs, $4 each. The transmission shops never saw those cars. That data existed. It lived in fleet maintenance records. It was never announced, never published in a trade journal, never submitted to the Automotive Transmission Service Group as evidence. Because the people who ran the rebuild shops had no financial interest interest in proving that a $4 bottle could make their most profitable repair unnecessary. And then the villain entered the frame, not a single person, a structure, a licensing architecture built by the major fluid manufacturers, the Dexron specification owned by General Motors, the Mercon specification controlled by Ford, that defined exactly which fluid formulations were approved for use in automatic transmissions. The transmission repair market in the United States generates over $1 billion annually. The ATF specification system is the valve that controls access to that market. When fluid specifications began tightening in the late 1980s and into the 1990s, independent friction modifier additives, the kind you could buy for $4 at a parts counter, were systematically excluded from approved formulation lists. Not banned, not proven harmful, simply excluded. Mechanics who recommended them faced warranty liability arguments from service managers reading from scripts written by legal departments that answered to the same corporate structure that owned the fluid specification. Service writers were trained to call them unapproved additives with a tone that implied illegality. The industry didn't need a law, it needed a label, and it printed one. Lifetime Fluid. That is the phrase that built the suppression. Lifetime Fluid, the factory fill ATF that came in your transmission, rated by the manufacturer as requiring no service for the life of the vehicle. The chemical reality is something different. The friction modifier content in standard ATF, whether phosphorus-based additive packages or ester-based film strength compounds, depletes under heat cycling. At a clutch pack, surface temperature of approximately 210 degrees Fahrenheit during a hard shift, the active modifier layer begins to thin. By 30,000 miles of normal driving, SAE Technical Research on ATF friction modifier behavior has documented that the friction coefficient at the clutch interface has shifted measurably from factory specification. The fluid is still fluid, the transmission still shifts, but the microscopic protection layer that prevented clutch pack fiber degradation is gone. The layer that the Asen Warner engineers built their entire protocol around. Gone by 30,000 miles. Gone while your dealer's service menu still listed Lifetime Fluid as the reason you didn't need to come in. Gone while the clutch packs wore toward the failure threshold that the industry had already priced into their rebuild menu. Lifetime Fluid. Lifetime. Until the transmission dies. Independent transmission rebuilders who have spoken publicly about this dynamic, experienced technicians with decades of teardown evidence, describe a consistent pattern. Transmissions arriving for rebuild that show clutch pack wear consistent with fluid degradation, not mechanical failure. The steel separator plate scored, the friction material thinned unevenly, the solenoid bores varnished from fluid that cooked past its additive threshold and left deposits on every surface it touched. The average rebuild runs between $2,400 and $4,500 at current labor and parts rates. These rebuilders are not malicious people. They are operating inside a training and liability framework constructed by an industry that defined proper service in a way that excluded the cheap intervention. It's not illegal to recommend a friction modifier. It's just not on the approved list. Funny how that works. The Dealer Service Bay version of this suppression is even more direct. A transmission flush service at a franchise dealership costs between $250 and $350. The actual fluid cost to the dealership is approximately $18. The additive that could make the service complete, the friction modifier that restores the depleted compound layer, costs the dealer roughly $2.80 wholesale. It is not included in the flush. The service ticket doesn't mention it. The service advisor doesn't mention it. The laminated maintenance menu posted above the waiting room coffee machine doesn't mention it. The service is sold as comprehensive maintenance. It is half a job, priced as a full one, repeated every 30,000 miles for the life of the vehicle, generating margin on every visit, while the clutch packs wear incrementally toward the $3,200 rebuild that closes the loop. They charge you $300 to do half the job. While the American dealer network was building that margin structure, Japanese commercial taxi fleets running Toyota Crown and Nissan Cedric vehicles through the 1980s and 1990s were producing data that should have rewritten the service standard. Taxi operations in Osaka and Tokyo running high mileage cycles on vehicles that needed to stay on the road. Documented transmission lifespans that ran dramatically beyond the industry average. Without friction modifier protocol, fleet transmission service life aligned with international norms. Roughly 120,000 miles before performance degradation lubrication required intervention. Fleets operating a consistent friction modifier addition schedule documented transmission service life exceeding 220,000 miles on the same hardware, with the same base fluid under higher stress operating conditions than most private vehicles ever experience. Vehicles running 12-hour shifts through urban stop-and-go cycles, summer heat, loaded to passenger capacity every single day. 500,000 kilometers, same transmission, same fluid, one difference. That data didn't disappear because it was disproven. It disappeared because it existed in Japanese Transport Ministry vehicle longevity records and fleet operator maintenance archives that no American parts manufacturer had any incentive to translate, publish, or distribute. Back in the United States, government fleet procurement records, and accessible through the General Services Administration's Vehicle Maintenance Reporting System, tell a parallel story. Fleet managers operating pools of 200 or more government vehicles, working under budget constraints that made transmission rebuild costs a serious line item. Quietly authorized friction modifier addition as a cost reduction measure. The results were documented internally. The savings were real. Transmission service intervals extended. Rebuild frequency dropped. Budget variance reports showed the difference in black and white, filed into procurement archives that no automotive trade journal has ever cited, and not one press release was issued. Not one trade publication ran the story. The annual additive cost per vehicle ran approximately $12. The maintenance cost reduction was documented internally and never publicized. Your tax dollars paid for the proof. You just weren't allowed to see it. Here is what the 10-year cost model looks like when you hold both numbers in the same hand. Average transmission rebuild, $3,200. Friction modifier bottle, applied every 30,000 miles, $4 to $8. Over a 10-year vehicle ownership period, the total additive cost is approximately $80. The minimum savings differential is $3,120, and that assumes only one rebuild event avoided on one vehicle over one ownership cycle. Multiply that by the number of vehicles on American roads. Multiply it by 60 years of suppressed service protocol. That number has a weight to it. That number has a name, and the name is the transmission repair industry's annual revenue, collected one clutch pack failure at a time from drivers who were never told that prevention cost $4. $80 across 10 years, or $3,200 on a Tuesday. Now here is the reveal, the exact thing that the Ace and Warner engineers documented in Toyota City in the 1960s. The same principle the Chicago taxi fleets used without announcement. The same intervention that Japanese commercial operators ran for 30 years on vehicles that refused to die. It is sitting on a shelf at your local auto parts store right now. Between the oil treatments and the fuel injector cleaners and the products that do nothing, it is not behind a counter. It does not require a part number lookup or a mechanic's authorization. Lubiguard automatic transmission fluid protectant, a bottle approximately the size of a large condiment container. The cap is red. The label is not dramatic. Nothing about it signals that it represents 60 years of suppressed service knowledge and billions of dollars in repairs that didn't have to happen. The application is specific and it matters. You add a volume equal to roughly 10% of your total transmission fluid capacity and approximately 1 quart in a standard 10-quart system. You do it with the engine warm and idling in park. You add it through the transmission dipstick tube, slowly, letting it mix with the fluid already circulating through the valve body and the clutch packs and the torque converter. You do this every 30,000 miles, or immediately if your transmission is already showing hesitation or soft shift behavior. Before you add anything, pull the dipstick. Fresh ATF is bright red, almost translucent in good light, clean on the rag, no smell. Degraded ATF is brown. If it carries any burnt smell at all, that acrid faintly sweet odor of cooked friction material clinging to the dipstick, that is the friction modifier layer signaling its total depletion. The clutch packs are already running without protection at that point. The rebuild clock has already started. The bottle costs between $4 and $8 at retail. It is not a specialty item. It requires no special tools, no lift, no appointment, no service writer handing you an estimate across a counter like a court summons. It was in the original ACE and service protocol until someone removed it. 5 layers of evidence. 5 decades of documentation, a Japanese factory QA record from a Toyota City assembly line in 1964, a Chicago fleet maintenance log tracking 400 vehicles across hundreds of thousands of collective miles, an SAE technical paper on friction modifier depletion under heat cycling, a dealer parts invoice that shows the $2.80 wholesale cost of the additive they didn't include in your $300 flush, a 10-year cost model that reduces a $3,200 repair to an $80 $50 maintenance line. 5 sources, 5 decades, 1 bottle. The industry spent 60 years building a service economy on the assumption that you would never hold all 5 of those things in the same moment, that you would hear lifetime fluid and believe it, that you would see the flush service price and assume it was complete, that the $4 bottle on the shelf at the parts store would remain invisible behind the vocabulary of approved specifications and liability frameworks and laminated service menus printed in bulk and posted in waiting rooms designed to make you feel like the expertise was theirs and the ignorance was yours. It was never yours. You are standing in the driveway now, the dipstick is in your hand, the fluid on the end of it is brown. You know what that means. You know what it costs to ignore it. You know what the dealer would charge you to address it incompletely. And you know what the rebuilder would charge you to address it too late. And you know exactly, specifically with the same knowledge that a taxi fleet in Osaka used for 30 years while the industry collected service fees on the same problem. What to do about it for $4? They removed one line from your manual. You just put it back.